Greetings. I'm supposed not to agitate you. I'll tell you what, he's asked me not to come several times. Delighted to share with you, and back in this room, I understand 52% wanted to come back here, 48% wanted to stay in there, and another 12% wanted to stay home. I forget how that is. At any rate, if you're there, we're glad you're there. I have a feeling, and perhaps what I read this week might be helpful. There was a gentleman who called the newspaper to report that his Sunday paper had not been delivered. And the lady was very kind, but she said, "Sir, it will be delivered. Today is Saturday." And he frowned a minute, and then he said, "Oh, I guess that explains why there was no one in worship today." We feel that way sometimes. Anyway, I hope that perhaps 2 or 3 notes I sent to you might be useful to you. We have a very familiar story. Genesis, more than probably any other book in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, brings us some wonderful, very personal experiences in terms of family life. And Jacob reveals a lot of them. Joseph does also. If you started in the 45th chapter of Genesis, you'd primarily be dealing with Joseph's struggle to forgive 10 brothers for betraying him, casting him in a pit, and also selling him, depending on which version you read. There are some who say that the traveling Phoenicians actually kidnapped him. Whatever the story side of it is, they at one point wanted to kill him. Reuben, the oldest, said, "Why don't we place him in the pit?" His plan was to come back later and take him out. When he got there, the pit was empty. He had been sold. He goes to Potiphar's life. Would you like for me to read from chapters 32 to 45? It's a really fascinating unraveling of a conversation and the story of a family. He goes, as you probably remember, to one of the primary people in the life and leadership of Pharaoh's world in Egypt. It is there that he is a slave to Potiphar. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. He, showing character, rejects that. She pretends he has tried to assault her. He is imprisoned. He tells a baker and another server how to interpret dreams they have. This is a summary, folks. When later on the Pharaoh has a dream and cannot interpret it, then Joseph interprets it. You remember that part of the story also. In the process, he's elevated because what he interpreted was 7 years of great production and food, and then 7 years of famine. And to Pharaoh's trust and then surprise, that all happened. He's elevated then second only to Pharaoh. And then other people begin to have famines. And Egypt is the only place where there is food. That's when 10 brothers are asked by their father, Jacob. You have 2 conversations here. Some call him Jacob, by then some call him Israel, right? He sends the 10 brothers down to get some corn or grain, depending on what version you read. It is there that Joseph recognizes him. He is now in charge, and he's struggling with years of betrayal and the perception that they do not like him. He has some good reason for that. He was probably a mama's boy, but he was at least a favorite in the family. Point of confession, part of my struggle growing up was at points I was elected among 3 sons to be the favorite in the family. I always felt guilty about that because I didn't ask for it and struggled with it. By contrast, Joseph seems to like it. He went around telling stories and interpreting dreams, and he got in trouble, and that's how he got in a pit. Now, fast forward at least 7, maybe 10 or 12 more years, and here he has his brothers. In case you don't pick up on the nuance in Genesis, he is speaking in Arabic, Egyptian Arabic. They are in their Hebrew or Aramaic. So he pretends not to know them, accuses them of awful things, tells them they cannot get grain unless they bring their younger brother, his favorite brother. And in the process, the struggle of the unforgiveness continues. We're now in chapter 44 and a half. We're actually in 45. It is there in the midst of a second trip, and 1 year with one of the sons, his brother, oldest one, Reuben, whom he could trust the most, in jail for a year, that they come back for more food. And it is then that, overcome by emotion, he decides to speak to them. And he does it for the first time in Aramaic. They are stunned for two reasons. One, he's speaking their language. He's not speaking the Arabic. Number two, they begin to recognize him. At first, there's denial, and then there's a sense. Their guilt was already there. Going back and forth, they had already decided that the reason there was a famine in Canaan where they lived was because God was punishing them for what they had done. Now they even feel a stronger sense of guilt. And as they deal with that, he begins to speak of the experience of grace and forgiveness. How do you deal with forgiveness in family life? Sometimes people have said that's far more difficult than even dealing with forgiveness in other relationships. I don't know. As I have read and I have studied people and relationships as pastor and professor and therapist, I've heard people struggle with two or three things. One of them is, I would forgive her or I would forgive him if he would only confess to what he has done. And they're stuck. Because some people will never confess, will they? Some people will never acknowledge, and that's part of the journey of that. Some people, I believe, mistakenly also believe that if they do not forgive, the weight of the struggle is with the one who is not forgiven, the one who offended, rather. But the weight remains, as Christ said later in the New Testament, with the one who cannot let go of it. Shall we take forgiveness lightly then? Certainly not. These family members had several years to deal with guilt and the sense of unforgiveness. One of the questions I left for you as you consider the issue of what was going on in this family circle is the question, is forgiveness always realizable? Is it possible? I think it is. You and I have seen human beings do that. It is not an easy job, but sometimes people can forgive because they have discovered the secret that it releases them. Another frequent concern I've heard from people who are forgiving, even in families, is the misperception that they need to go back to the same trust level they had before. I don't believe that's necessary. There are some people who are not capable of the trust we have given them before, and they have to earn it if they can. Returning to a sense of forgiveness does not always mean to return to the same level of trust. I offer that to you because sometimes Jesus Christ even responded in different ways in terms of trust with a group of 12 and 3 at places where he felt that he could bestow that much trust upon them. Hence another question for you and for me as we deal with the experience of forgiveness. How can we, to what degree do we, and how do we offer it? Several people have suggested that some of that has to do with the difficulty of family issues that are so complex. Incidentally, some people know my family well. My son sent a note after a beach trip we took together, apparently thanking us for taking the trip with him. But here's what it says. My doctor asked if anyone in my family suffers from insanity. I said, no, we all seem to be enjoying it. There's some things in the family we cannot overcome. As some of you know, I struggled in my experience with my older brother who was bipolar and the issue of how to relate trust, intimacy, and care at places where I felt betrayed. How do you deal with that in a different way? Each of us has our particular family members, and in the process of that, we try to ascertain in what ways we are contained, controlled, or released by the experience of forgiveness. So I raise the question first for you, is it possible? Yes. Is it desirable? I believe so. You heard me say that, but I'll let you think about it. Because some people, third comment, as I've learned from folks, some people want those who have offended to suffer as much as they themselves have and to show it before they will release them. Again, when that occurs, my experience has been that they themselves are the ones controlled or captured. Often not easy to understand. But unforgiveness has a price as well as forgiveness. Back to Joseph, they're cementing a relationship. What did it mean for those brothers who want to kill him? How much anger, how much pain was behind what they were saying and doing? The family therapists in systems therapy speak of cutoff. There is an experience with a family member where you can no longer control what they do in any way or continue a relationship without damage to yourself. And so you cut it off. That means you no longer experience or continue the relationship, sometimes for a while, sometimes permanently. Was cut off what was going on with these 10 brothers? Were they hoping to regain status or friendship or love from parent by having him disappear? There are times and experiences where I know for the sake of the healing and the health of someone who is being abused, that cutoff is temporarily important, essential. I'm advocating that. But I leave it to you to figure out at what point that becomes so damaging that it becomes a burden to the person who has administered the cutoff. Can cutoff be healthy? Only to set boundaries on experiences of unhealthy relationships for reconnecting and refiguring. Third question, still in the 45th chapter. Joseph, how long does it take to forgive? A while. Sometimes we think as we listen to Christ speaking of forgiveness that it's a matter of saying a few words, but you and I know that it's far more than that. We begin with the mind, I think, we go to the heart, and then we experience events and actions which heal us to a place where we can offer forgiveness. I think Joseph spent a lot of time reflecting on what his brothers had done to him and what he wanted to do back. If you go 2 chapters before, he accuses them of being a spy. He puts them in jail, at least 1 or 2. He tells them the favorite son of his father now left needs to come in or they will receive no grain. He just abuses them back for a while. But now in the 45th chapter, he begins to cry. He sends everyone else out of the room but his brothers. He has already scared them because he placed them at a meal by their age. And they wondered, what in the world is going on? This man knows more about us than we thought. He is giving them a sign. As you probably also know, Egyptians would never sit down and eat with Hebrews. When he has everyone else sit down, leave, he sits down with them. And then he begins, as I said before, to speak in their own language and to tell them who he is. They are scared now that they will die. Somewhere in the conversation, if you read the 45th chapter, he says a very significant, one of the most powerful phrases, I think, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. What you meant for harm, God used for good. Interesting. Captivating. I didn't say that always happens. But there are places where what we do, and that's reassuring to me, what we do in harm, with harm, God can still use for good. And that is most likely the crowning conversation about this reconciliation. People now come from Canaan. He invites the father. They settle in the land of Goshen, perhaps. And this is part of the journey where they are now two Israels for the future in the conversation. Some who went to Egypt, some who did not. They'll have other arguments later because some went and some didn't. There are some who are now considered second-class citizens for having gone and now adopting a slave posture. But the question remains, what do we do with forgiveness? What do we learn from these folks? I think in one situation, you and I can reflect and perhaps think of a family member or perhaps someone very close like a family with whom we struggle with the issue of forgiveness. Is it possible? Not easy. Is it a gift? Eventually. Are there times when we need boundaries because we will otherwise be abused in relationships? Likely. And the question then remaining, how do we process over a period of time the experiences of abuse, misconstrued behavior, and being manipulated or used? That to me is part of the struggle of the chapters from 37 to 45 in the book of Genesis. Take a moment for your own reflection. I've given you a little time for that. There is a bonus. We renew your membership if you make a comment. Have you had experiences with forgiveness that have been a struggle or difficult? Have you, in this conversation, sensed that this is part of the journey we all struggle with at some point or other? Having trouble forgiving me? Shall we go outside?
Just don't cry.
That's right.
Dan, you might comment on what I find interesting was the murder of those Mennonite or Amish school kids several years ago.
Oh, yes.
And the Mennonite families
You speak.
pretty quickly granted forgiveness, which I was glad and sad because it was sort of like, well, I'm glad you can do that. I'm kind of sad that you make it so quick. I don't know if I even feel like you've had time to process grief.
I think you're right. From
Just-
where I sit.
I've wondered about, I mean, so we got terrific testimony coverage, which I thought was wonderful, but I suspect I wasn't the only one thinking, well, gee, maybe that came a little quick.
I felt that with you. I think the experience of forgiveness does need to deal with the processing of grief. That's why I said before that I think there are stages in this process. My interpretation, which may not be accurate, is that they made a public statement, which was very much in keeping with their faith, and that they then processed some of that pain and what I'll call carrying anger, because their life has been permanently transformed, like people in Uvalde or somewhere else. The entire experience of what it means to dream, to have a family, to have children. So I do think there was a public expression of that, which was, I think, not only appropriate, but a model. And then a struggle, and we haven't heard lately more, at least I have not. But you and I have heard that from other sources, haven't we? People who have misused people and killed, murdered. That's why I believe it is a process, and it does take its time. Did you want to say more about that?
No, I'm in the choir. That's all I got to say.
If Bert stands during an anthem to make a comment, let's all listen.
Well, as long as it's not a
Thank you,
solo.
Bert. Right. Yes, sir.
What are your comments on all of us have experienced it or heard about have you really forgiven if you don't forget?
Mm-hmm.
I said, what are your comments on that?
Very, very helpful. I started to say something about that and then I did not. Lewis Smedes, S-M-E-D-E-S, a very useful book called Forgive and Forget, Healing the Hurts we don't deserve. There are those who say that the only way to forgive is to forget. My sense, in everything I read and every experience I have shared with others, is that forgetting in some ways has to be interpreted. Because if it means forgetting entirely in such a way that nobody learned anything from it, I'm not sure that's accurate or helpful forgetting.
That's good.
Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does.
I don't believe the intent was forgetting in such a way that I don't even remember it all. I'm interpreting when I say that. Lewis Smedes, in a very fine hardback years ago, addressed that, I thought, very, very caringly, as have a few other people. But the issue is, what do we do with what has happened in order to process forgiveness? And I think acknowledging, even if I'm the only one who does it, and processing the pain so that I learn from it. And even the gift of being able to forgive is part of the issue, not forgetting in the sense of wiped out. It is not held against that person, however, is the reality behind the forgetting, if I understood what people are saying. Is that helpful word? Thank you. Did you want to say more about that?
Once I was teaching the Sunday school class when I was very young. I was teaching Tim Sexton's mother and her age group, and someone raised that question. I just for once stood there and didn't say anything because I didn't know. And another lady in the class said to that question, is it possible to forgive and forget? And another lady said, I think it is the attitude with which we remember.
There you go.
I've never forgotten that.
A very good word.
A good word, which is, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah. We struggle with that, though. What does that mean? Because does that mean nothing matters, you know? Yes.
I know a situation where something happened in the family, I don't even know what, where one person held on to that grudge to the grave. It affected that person. It also affected the people around that person because of the way that person responded whenever anything related to it came up. So it went far beyond just.
It has a communal effect, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. One detail in that conversation that I found interesting in the 45th chapter. Did Joseph ever take responsibility for enjoying the favoritism? He had the coat of many colors. Does that sound like some play you've heard of? We sound like he was a hero, but he became a hero and he showed character, but he also enjoyed being, you know, his dream was that all his brothers would bow before him. And that's why they wanted to get rid of him. Years later, they bow before him, you see, when they come to get grain. But I don't hear anything about, I was partly responsible for your not liking me, for what that's worth, you know. I think it's a communal experience and it affects several people, no doubt about it. Forgiveness is complex, isn't it? The wounds can be heavy. Another word or two?
I was hoping to see an issue of your book here today.
Pardon me?
I was hoping to see an issue of your new book here today on Earth.
Well, I can't forgive them for turning it down. Thank you for saying that.
I mean, is that right here and there? We can't call it a quarterly any longer because it's 4 months, so I guess we call it a thirdly.
used and flowing, right? God bless you. Oh,
Are there other instances of favoritism within a family? I'm thinking of the prodigal son story with the brother taking a family back to this young person go live the life he lived, come back and be celebrated once again. Are there other instances in the Bible that deal with favoritism within a family?
I'm not thinking of any very specific, but I have one in my head from other experiences. I wonder how the other disciples felt when he took 3 aside. Maybe they didn't know it, but I wonder how they felt, you know. I wondered how those 3 felt. Or were they humbly thinking, well, at least he trusts me and I'm a good listener. But you know what I'm asking, like what you're asking. You know? In Paul's conversations with a few of his quote interns, it seemed there was some favoritism there, but not blatant that I can think of. Good question, though, and I'll go back and think about that. Sure.
I was moved when I read the book Unforgiven. Probably many of us have read that by was Laura Hildebrand about the Olympic runner who crashed in the Pacific, became a Japanese POW during World War II. And the amazing part of the story is that after the war, he came back and his life just spiraled down. He became a bad alcoholic and he was slowly dying by inches when his wife got him to go to a Billy Graham revival. And he found Christ. And then how he worked through that forgiveness and then went back to Japan and tracked down all the guards except for the one that was would not meet with him and went to Australia. But how he worked through that and how it saved his life is the best part of the whole story.
No doubt, no doubt. And with it, you point out that there was a captain who would never meet with him, who had been part of the greatest atrocities, right? Yes. Yeah. Quite a story. Just passed away in 2007.
Regardless of how anyone feels about Richard Nixon, when he left the White House, wasn't his comment about the press, because he always had a battle with the press. He felt that they treated him unfairly. And he said, if we don't forgive, something to this effect, I don't know the exact quote, but something to the effect that if we keep harboring these feelings, then we're the ones who've lost, they've won. And I think that's something that is stuck in my mind from that era.
No doubt. And I think if there's any takeaway, you've probably indicated its greatest impact, and that is, I don't think we give full understanding or credit to the fact that when we remain unforgiving, we carry a load, an energy is misdirected, and it controls our life to the point that we are not free to become ourselves as God intended. Sorry, Dean.
You know, maybe you know of situations where the offender is really unaware of what that person, what they did and who they did it to, and go on as if nothing happened. In their minds, nothing happened, but in the others, it was a major offense.
It's an ongoing struggle because, again, it's part of communication and grace, I think. People walk around unaware that they have in some way offended somebody, and they would try to somehow to heal the wound if they knew it was there. But we can contain it and not share it. That's why I think speaking the truth in love can be a reversal of that process. We just don't know sometimes. Things we think are neutral can be very, very offensive. A good word, Dean. Thank you. God bless your struggle and your joy, that grace may abound and forgiveness may be a gift. Thank you very much.
Dan.